So I saw something interesting this morning. I was looking at a submission by a young boy called Blake Williams in New Zealand for the select committee for the conversion therapy ban. And at the end of it, he was treated in a rather condescending manner, in a dismissive manner, that his concerns that there'd be medicalisation, sterilisation of people, and a conflation of sex and gender identity, etc., as we've seen in every single country where the conversion therapy bans have happened. He was dismissed as that this is not happening and we don't have time to tell you why everything you're thinking about this is wrong. So I looked up the word gender identity, what's the definition there in New Zealand, and discovered there is none. I checked on the forums, there's lawyers, etc., and found out the Law Commission has complained to New Zealand government because there is no definition of gender identity. So that's kind of really sneaky. So looking at the Denton's handbook again, it's got strategies on how to embed gender identity ideology into law. There's a few ways that you can bring gender identity ideology into law, and I want to discuss Victoria and what New Zealand's doing, which is a bit of a twist on one of the strategies. So in New Zealand, let's move on. In Australia, a lawyer friend of mine had noticed that something unusual has been happening in the bills, that for some reason, all these bills that you're going to look at, that the definition of sex was being replaced with the word gender, which doesn't raise any alarm bells, generally speaking, because gender's always been used as a polite term for sex, right? You know, one's sex, one's gender. But this was happening. Why was this happening through all these different bills? And there's a lot of them because they protect, sex, sex-based rights. And here's the thing, what she discovered is when you change the word sex to gender, and then you change the definition of gender to include gender identity, which has nothing to do with that sex at all, then in one swoop, with changing that redefinition of word, you can remove sex-based rights in Australia, which happened in a lot of states, all the way across. How sneaky, right? Very clever. So that's one way to do it, is rechange the word sex to gender identity. Now so Victoria, unlike New Zealand, which hasn't defined gender identity yet, they did define gender identity, and here's another use of language to gain power. What they did is they made this identity so obscure, so broad, so there's no ability to actually define it, which the law commissions in Australia had a complaint with. It's become so circular, it's left to the state to define it. And here in Victoria, the state has set up a commission, it's going to be kicking in February, on who is not complying to a gender identity ideology. And if you don't comply, it's like $1 million for a company, for a sanction, up to 10 years jail, for individuals up to 5 years jail, around $250,000, for if you're not compliant to gender identity ideology. So that's the worry. When you have a state that is defining what is offence or not, that they are the jury, they're the judge, they're the executioner, and you have no protection in law because the definition is so vague, it could mean anything and everything, and the definitions of sexual orientation and gender identity are so vague that they apply to every single person. That's a power grab. Below I'll put a link onto exactly what the commission is over in Victoria. But what has New Zealand's done is a little bit different. Instead of actually giving that obscure definition, they've learned from Victoria not to put it in at all. But mark my words, what they'll do is they'll define that after the fact, after the bills have gone in. And then they can enact the same kind of power grab that Victoria's gone for. At the moment, there's no definition, and as it stands, by common understanding of the word gender identity, it doesn't look like it's going to bring in Victoria gender affirmation and mandatory gender affirmation, which is medical, social, medical and surgical transitioning, particularly focused on youth, and sanctions if you do not comply, no, it looks safe. But once they do that, then that's what you're going to find happen. And look, I tell you right now, if you compare the Victoria conversion ban, if you're one of these nerds like me who want to look at everything, compare it and then compare New Zealand's bill, and you can find it's word for word the same, or near enough to be the same.